Dear viewers and listeners, Assalamu Alaikum. In this monologue, I am going to discuss and evaluate the concept of polygamy and the guidelines that have been set in the glorious Koran for this practice. Based on false assumptions, stories, and traditions, many people believe that polygamy is an unhindered right that is granted to man under all circumstances. However, there are severe restrictions imposed by the merciful Lord under which a man may exercise this right. The glorious Quran, also called Kitab al-Furqan, provides clear parameters under which this right may be exercised as an exception rather than as a rule. The first question that may come into the mind is, what is polygamy? Polygamy broadly implies a state of marriage to many spouses. Thus, polygamy will be present where a man has more than one wife or a wife has more than one husband. Based on this benchmark, a polygamy may be of two types. First category is called polygyny, under which a man is married to more than one wife at a time. The second category is called polyandry, under which a woman is married to more than one husband at a time. We will explore whether polygyny or polyandry are permissible in Islam under the principles laid down in the glorious Quran. The second question is, how many spouses a man or woman may have at a time and under what circumstances? The answer to this question is provided in chapter 4 verse 3 in the following words. If you fear that you will not deal fairly with orphan girls, you may marry whichever women seem good to you, 2, 3, or 4. If you fear that you cannot be equitable, then marry only one, or your slave, that is more likely to make you avoid bias. This verse highlights the following important facts. 1. A man may marry an orphan girl as a wife provided he treats her fairly. Why is it important? An orphan girl may be considered as the most vulnerable segment of the society because she has no parents who can protect her in case of a dispute with her husband, and she is physically a weaker sex who needs protection and care of a man. Therefore, God commands that a man may marry an orphan girl only if he is sure to treat her fairly and without any discrimination due to her weaker social status. 2. However, if a man believes that due to family pressure of his existing wife or wives, he cannot treat an orphan girl fairly, then he may marry some other woman whose parents are alive and who can counter the bias of existing wives towards her. 3. Even in this case, a man is not allowed to marry more than one wife if he cannot be equitable to all the wives in physical, social, and economic sense. Indeed, it is almost impossible for most of men to be equitable with more than one wife against all benchmarks. This may be partly since each wife may be biased as a human being, and partly because the man may be inclined towards the new wife due to compatibility and initial charm of a new bride. 4. However, if a man believes that it would be difficult for him to be equitable with a second wife, then he may instead marry a slave girl who would be content with lesser rights. The glorious Quran commands that the rights and obligations of a slave are half to that of a free person. So a slave wife is likely to be content with lesser privileges offered by the husband. 5. This verse allows a man to marry more than one wife under specific circumstances. The silence about women to exercise this right precludes the possibility of polyandry in Islam. Another question may be, could a man treat more than one wife fairly? The answer to this question is beautifully provided in chapter 4 verse 129 of glorious Quran in the following words. You will never be able to treat your wives with equal fairness, however much you may desire to do so. But do not ignore one wife altogether, leaving her suspended. If you make amends and remain conscious of God, He is most forgiving and merciful. This verse makes the following important points. 1. There is a clear command that despite all good intentions, it is impossible for a man to treat all wives equally and fairly. The obvious reasons for this situation are personal bias of individual wife, personal preference of husband for one wife over the other, varying degree of compatibilities between the husband and each wife, and so on. 2. Keeping in view these human limitations, God has set a clear benchmark of fairness under polygyny. This benchmark commands that the husband should not discriminate between wives intentionally, giving the overt impression to a neutral person that the less privileged wife is denied even the basic rights of a wife. These basic rights include right of conjugal relationship, lodging, food, and harmonious relationship between the spouses. 3. God further commands that if a man seeks repentance for his discriminatory behavior against a wife and mends his ways, Allah may forgive him. This fact confirms that a negligent discrimination against any wife is a serious sin in the eye of merciful Lord. In the light of wisdom provided by the relevant verses of the glorious Koran, it is evident that polygamy for women is not permissible. A man may exercise polygamy in limited circumstances if he can maintain substantial equity between wives on all fronts of marital relationship. The command of Allah that a man cannot maintain this equity between wives is a clear warning that one may resist polygamy to avoid wrath of Allah on the judgment day. A possible exception to this rule may be where the first wife is barren and the man marries another woman for the sake of children. Even in this case, he is not allowed to mistreat his first wife if he wants to continue this relationship. Now I sum up the key points discussed in this monologue for reinforcement purpose. 1. In Islam, polygamy is only permissible for men. 2. The maximum number of wives a man can have at a time is restricted to 4. 3. This polygamy is allowed as an exception where a man can fairly treat all wives. 4. If a man fails to treat any of the wives unjustly, he has committed a great sin for which he must seek pardon of Allah and mend his ways with the oppressed wife. 5. Allah in His eternal wisdom warns men that you cannot treat all wives equitably even if you try to do so. 6. The lives of various prophets as narrated in the glorious Quran are a testimony to this fact. 7. The bottom line is that a wise man will never practice polygamy unless he is marrying a second wife purely for the sake of children. Even in this case, he is not allowed to discriminate against the barren wife. I conclude my monologue on polygamy with a prayer that Allah Almighty may bless this effort and may incline the listeners of this monologue towards reading and understanding the glorious Quran and the language of their choice, so that they may lead their lives as true believers in one God and should never be misguided by any professional priest or clergy. Ameen. Please do subscribe and share my channel for updates. It's free.